The bass pulsed through the floor like a heartbeat, deep and relentless, shaking the glasses on silver trays. Gold light spilled from the chandeliers of the Mirador Hotel, turning strangers into silhouettes that shimmered and blurred in motion. I shouldn't have been there, just a shadow at the edge of Barcelona's glittering elite. But when your best friend is an event photographer and promises double pay for an assistant, you don't say no. Not when eviction notices have started appearing under your door. Just hold the reflector and smile, my friend Lila had said, pressing a camera strap over her shoulder before vanishing into the glittering crowd. And don't faint this time, okay? I laughed it off then. But now, alone in a sea of perfume and privilege, my pulse was a fragile thing. The staff champagne they'd given us tasted like burnt sugar. Cheap, but potent. I hadn't eaten since the stale croissant from yesterday. It sat heavy in my stomach. Or maybe that was just nerves. My uniform, black shirt, black trousers, hung a little loose from losing too much weight too fast. The world spun slightly as I steadied myself against a marble pillar, pretending to check my phone. That's when I noticed him. He didn't move like the others. While the room ebbed and flowed in careless luxury, he cut through it with purpose, deliberate as a blade. 3 men followed discreetly behind him. Bodyguards, I guessed. His suit wasn't ostentatious, but something about the fabric, the way it caught the light and swallowed it again, screamed expensive. Italian, probably bespoke. When he turned his head, I caught the outline of his profile. Sharp jaw, dark hair swept neatly back, eyes that didn't just look, they assessed. I knew that face. Or at least I'd seen it once on a business magazine cover I'd been using as a paint-mixing surface. Lorenzo Valles, billionaire investor, art patron, and, according to rumors, the kind of man whose money came from both boardrooms and shadows. My stomach flipped. He should have had no reason to notice someone like me. But somehow, across the sea of sequins and tuxedos, his gaze found mine. The connection lasted a single second, long enough to make me forget to breathe. Then, his mouth curved in the faintest ghost of a smile. It wasn't friendly. It was aware. Someone jostled me, sloshing champagne down my borrowed shirt. "Move it, will you?" a woman hissed, sweeping past me in a blur of silk. The moment shattered. I pressed a napkin against the spreading stain, cursing under my breath. When I looked up again, Lorenzo Valles was gone. "Clara! There you are!" Lila appeared at my side, camera strap cutting into her shoulder. "I need you upstairs. The client wants balcony shots. Come on!" I followed her gratefully, relieved to have something to do. The second-floor balcony overlooked the entire ballroom, giving a panoramic view of wealth and beauty below. "Hold this," Lila ordered, shoving the reflector into my hands. "And don't drop it. It costs more than your rent." "That's comforting," I muttered, adjusting my grip. The music swelled, bass vibrating through the floor. Below, champagne glasses clinked and laughter rose like birds taking flight. The sound seemed distant. Too distant. The room began to tilt. "Lila," I started. "I don't—" Darkness bloomed at the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was her reaching for me as the reflector slipped from my hands and everything went black. When I came to, I wasn't lying on marble anymore. Soft leather cradled my back, and the world swayed gently as if I were floating. The air smelled of sandalwood and something faintly metallic. My eyes fluttered open to find a face hovering above mine, sharp, controlled, and utterly unfamiliar, yet already imprinted in my mind. Lorenzo Valles. He was closer than I'd ever imagined he could be, his arm around my shoulders, the other resting protectively across my waist. His gaze pinned me like a spotlight. "Don't move," he said, voice low, calm, authoritative. "You fainted." I blinked, trying to orient myself. "We're in a car?" "A limousine," he corrected, glancing toward the tinted window. Outside, the city glowed in streaks of amber and shadow. Where are you taking me?" "Hospital," he said simply. "No." I tried to sit up. "No hospitals. I can't afford—" His hand steadied me before I could embarrass myself further. "You hit your head. You're not paying for anything." Something in his tone made it impossible to argue. Who are you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Lorenzo Valles." He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile, Just said it like a statement of fact. The name hit me harder than the fainting spell. Valez Group. Real estate, private acquisitions, alleged corruption trials that mysteriously vanished. I was alone in a car with a man who could make people disappear with a phone call. "I need to go home," I whispered. He studied me for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly, as if evaluating something only he could see. "You're an artist, aren't you?" The question threw me. "How do you—" "The paint under your fingernails," he said quietly. "I notice things." He reached for the intercom. "We'll go to the family clinic instead." Before I could protest again, the car slowed. As the door opened, cold night air rushed in, and with it the realization that I was stepping into a world far from mine. Hey, before we continue, if you're feeling the story so far, please tap that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this with someone who loves deep stories too. And let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Now let's return to the moment everything changed. The limousine slowed, its hum soft as a heartbeat beneath the quiet city night. Through the tinted glass, the lights of Barcelona blurred into gold streaks, the world outside distant and unreal. We stopped before a glass-fronted building that looked nothing like a hospital. It was too elegant, sterile in the way only wealth could afford to be. Clínica Valez. The name was engraved in silver on the wall like a signature that didn't need explaining. Before I could protest, the door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped aside with mechanical precision. Lorenzo was already out, his polished shoes touching the marble curb like he'd stepped from one reality into another. The Mercedes-Maybach S680 gleamed under the streetlight, an ocean of onyx and steel. He turned and extended a hand toward me. "Careful," he said quietly, voice calm but commanding. "You might be dizzy still." The ground was perfectly flat, but somehow my balance did falter, so I took his hand. The warmth of his skin was startling, real, steady. Inside, the clinic smelled of sandalwood and antiseptic, the kind of mixture that made you forget you were supposed to be afraid. The lighting was dim, almost theatrical. Like the set of a dream. A silver-haired doctor approached, her voice respectful, too respectful. "Señor Valez, we have a private suite ready." "That won't be necessary," I started, but he cut in without raising his voice. "It is," he said simply. "She hit her head." The doctor's expression flickered. "Of course, right this way." I glanced back at him, expecting some explanation, but he'd already turned his attention to the nearest guard, giving silent orders with nothing more than a look. It made me wonder, how many people did this man command with just a glance? How many had learned not to question him? And the deeper thought I didn't want to face, why didn't I pull away? Maybe part of me already knew that this was the kind of man who could change everything. One of those people whose gravity pulled you whether you wanted it or not. "And you? If someone like that reached out their hand, dangerous, mesmerizing, would you take it or would you run?" I didn't run. The next thing I remembered was waking beneath a ceiling of soft light and shadow. The sheets beneath me were smooth as silk. The faint hum of machines pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. And he was there. Lorenzo Valez sat by the window, sleeves rolled up, jacket draped over the chair like an afterthought. The city's reflection flickered against the glass behind him. When he noticed I was awake, he stood. "You were out for 4 hours," he said, tone even, but his eyes gave away concern. "Dehydration, low blood sugar, exhaustion." "I told you I was fine," I muttered. "You fainted in front of 500 people." "Not everyone was watching." I was. The way he said it made my pulse stumble. He crossed to a tray the nurse had left and lifted a croissant between long fingers, then tore it in half and handed me a piece. "Eat. I'm not hungry. Try lying better." I should have been offended. Instead, I laughed. Quiet, surprised. It was ridiculous how easy it felt to obey him, to take the bread and chew like it meant nothing. But it did. It meant everything. He leaned a shoulder against the window frame, watching. "How long have you been painting?" I blinked. "How do you—" "The paint under your fingernails," he said softly. "You try to scrub it off, but you don't use gloves. You're left-handed, judging by the calluses. And the way you observe the light, artists always notice light." I didn't answer. Couldn't, really. There was something unsettling about being seen that clearly. Later, After signing a stack of forms I didn't understand, Lorenzo insisted on driving me home himself. Not in the limousine this time, but in a midnight blue Aston Martin DB12 that growled to life with a quiet promise of power. The interior smelled of polished leather and sandalwood, the same scent that lingered around him. City lights rolled across the windshield like waves. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Barrio del Mar," I said, immediately regretting it. His glance flicked toward me. "That district isn't safe." "It's cheap," I replied, half defensive. He said nothing, but his silence carried judgment louder than words. When we reached my street, the car's glow cut through the dim alleys like something out of a different universe. The engine idled, low and steady, as I unbuckled my seatbelt. "This is me," I said, gesturing toward a cracked doorway with peeling paint. He turned to study the building, then me. "This isn't where someone like you belongs." I frowned. "Someone like me?" "Someone with talent." Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket, pulled out an ivory card, and pressed it into my palm. No logo, just a name and a number. "If you need anything," he said, "call me directly." "Why?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "Because not everyone gets a second chance at being seen," he said simply. "And you should be seen." He held my gaze a moment longer before getting out, walking around to open my door. The night air rushed in, cool and sharp. As I stepped out, I realized my hand was still wrapped around his card like it was something sacred. He inclined his head slightly. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Señor Valles." His mouth curved. "Lorenzo." And then he was gone, the Aston Martin whispering down the street until its taillights disappeared into the dark. Upstairs, Lila was pacing in our cramped living room. "Clara, where have you been? I thought you were—" "I'm fine," I said, holding up a hand. "Just a fainting thing. Long story." Her eyes landed on the card I still held. "What's that?" I hesitated. "He gave it to me. Lorenzo Valles." She froze. "The Lorenzo Valles? The man who owns half of Barcelona's coastline?" "The same," I said. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "And he took you to his clinic?" "Yes." "Clara." Lila's voice softened. "Guys like him don't do charity. They don't just help strangers." I dropped onto the couch, the exhaustion catching up with me all at once. "I know. So what does he want?" That was the question I didn't want to think about, because deep down, I feared the answer wasn't about what he wanted. It was about why I wanted to let him. Sometimes, you can feel your life shifting, even before anything actually changes. It's like standing at the edge of something vast, knowing that one decision, one phone call, will pull you over the line for good. And tell me honestly, if someone like Lorenzo Valles looked at you like you were the only real thing in the room, would you be able to walk away? Because I couldn't. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. The way he'd said, "You should be seen," replayed over and over, looping in the space between dream and waking. His voice still lingered in my apartment, quiet but commanding, the kind that filled silence even when he wasn't there. At some point, I drifted off, and when I woke, the morning light slicing through the blinds felt harsher than usual. Lila was already up, nursing a cup of instant coffee at our wobbly kitchen table. "You were talking in your sleep," she said without looking up. "Something about cars and danger," I groaned. "Fantastic. Now I dream about near-death experiences." Her gaze flicked to the ivory card sitting on the counter. "You didn't throw it away." "I will." "Sure." She took a sip of coffee. "Right after you stare at it for another hour." She wasn't wrong. The card gleamed under the weak sunlight, simple and perfect. Lorenzo's name embossed in clean silver. It felt heavy for its size, like it carried more meaning than paper should. I told myself I wasn't going to call. I even said it out loud. "I'm not calling him," I muttered, stuffing my paintbrushes into a cracked jar. But the truth, I'd already memorized the number. For 3 days, I tried to go back to normal. Morning classes, cheap meals, and long hours spent painting in the corner of our apartment, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and fading dreams. But normal wouldn't stick. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Every shadow outside the window looked like one of his black cars. I caught myself painting his face without meaning to. Strong lines, eyes like copper fire. On the 4th day, I broke. My finger hovered over his number for almost 10 minutes. When I finally pressed call, my pulse thundered so loud I could barely hear the first ring. He answered on the second. Clara! He didn't ask who it was. He already knew. His voice was a low hum, warm and deliberate, like silk drawn across glass. I wanted to thank you, I said, instantly hating how awkward I sounded, for helping me that night. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, but still. You didn't have to. I did. That word again, final, unarguable. A pause stretched, filled only by the faint sound of him exhaling. I was wondering, I began cautiously. You mentioned seeing my work? I remember. Silence again. Then, tomorrow afternoon, he said. 3:00. My driver will collect you. I blinked. Collect me? He ignored the question. Bring your best pieces, the ones that tell me who you are. My paintings are big, I stammered. I don't have a gallery or studio space right now. Just, where do you paint? My apartment. Then I'll come to you. The words landed like thunder in a small room. No, I said quickly. That's not necessary. It is, he replied, calm and absolute. If I'm to understand your art, I need to see it where it was born. There was no hesitation, no question mark in his tone, just certainty. And the strange thing was, part of me wanted that certainty. Before I could talk myself out of it, I heard myself say, Okay, 3:00, he said again. And Clara? Yes? Eat something today. Then the line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone, half annoyed, half something else, something dangerously close to excitement. Lila looked up from her laptop when she saw my face. Oh no, she said flatly. You called him. He's coming here tomorrow. She dropped her mug. He's what? I shrugged helplessly. He wants to see my art. Your art? She repeated. Is that what we're calling it now? I threw a crumpled towel at her but couldn't stop the laugh that escaped. It felt good. Strange, but good. To laugh after days of restless silence. That evening, I cleaned the apartment like I was expecting royalty, which, in a way, I was. We pushed furniture aside to make space for my canvases, the walls now alive with color and emotion. My largest piece, an oil painting of a woman dissolving into smoke, dominated the room. Next to it, smaller works, hands reaching for light, the Barcelona skyline fractured through rain, and one I'd painted in secret, a portrait of a man whose eyes were pure fire. When I stood back, I barely recognized my own work. Lila whistled. Clara, these are incredible. Like, actually incredible. I smiled weakly. They'll probably just look messy to him. She shook her head. Messy people make the best art. Just promise me you'll be careful tomorrow. Don't be alone with him. I nodded, though I didn't know if I could keep that promise, because even as I stood surrounded by my art, all I could think about was the sound of his voice when he said my name. The next day crawled by in slow motion. By the time the clock hit 2:55, my hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my paintbrush. Then came the knock. Sharp. Precise. I opened the door and for a moment forgot how to breathe. Lorenzo Velez stood there, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent for the year. Behind him, one of his security men waited beside a Mercedes Maybach S680. Engine idling, black as liquid night. Clara, he said, his tone both greeting and assessment. His gaze swept over me, not lingering, not leering, just seeing. You didn't eat. I blinked. How do you know that? You look pale. I'm always pale. His lips curved slightly. Then you always skip breakfast. Lila stepped forward before I could answer. You're early, she said sharply. We weren't expecting... Lorenzo turned his gaze on her, polite but cool. I'm never late. He stepped past me into the apartment and the air seemed to shift around him. The space felt smaller, charged. His eyes moved slowly across the paintings lining the walls. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, Show me. As he studied my work, I stood frozen, unsure whether to breathe or speak. He paused before my largest painting, the woman dissolving into smoke, and tilted his head. What's her name? She doesn't have one, I said softly. It's called Echo. It's about how people vanish, bit by bit, when no one really sees them. He turned to me, eyes darkening. You know that feeling well. It wasn't a question, and something inside me cracked a little, because he was right. I used to, I admitted. He took a step closer, voice dropping. Not anymore. Have you ever had someone look at your work, your life, your soul, and make you believe just for a moment that maybe you were meant for something greater? That's what it felt like in that room. Terrifying, addictive, real. And tell me, honestly, would you open your door to someone who saw straight through your walls, or would you lock it, afraid of what they might uncover? Because I didn't lock mine. Lorenzo's attention moved across the walls like a searchlight. Slow, deliberate, consuming. He didn't rush. He didn't speak for several minutes, only studied each brushstroke, as if decoding something invisible beneath the paint. I'd never felt so exposed. When he stopped before Echo, the woman dissolving into smoke, he stood so still that the hum of the refrigerator sounded deafening. Finally, he spoke. "She's not disappearing," he said quietly. "She's breaking free." I blinked. "That's not what I intended." He looked over his shoulder. "Art rarely obeys its creator." There was something in his tone, something that made my skin prickle. I crossed my arms. "You sound like you've done this before." "Interpreting pain?" His lips curved faintly. "Every day." He moved to another painting, hands through darkness. The light caught the copper threads I'd woven into the canvas, the same color as his eyes. "Who are they reaching for?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe for something they lost. Or something they can't have," he murmured, almost to himself. When he turned back to me, the weight of his gaze rooted me to the floor. For a heartbeat, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. "Do you sell your work?" he asked. "I've tried," I said. "But galleries want names, not stories. I want both." He stepped closer. "How much for these 3? I froze. "You want to buy them?" "Yes." I haven't really priced them." He studied me for a moment, then said, 50,000. My brain short-circuited. "Euros?" "Yes." "That's impossible." He smiled faintly. "You underestimate your worth." He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket, wrote something on a checkbook he seemed to carry like a weapon, and tore out a page. The sound of the paper ripping echoed louder than it should have. When he handed it to me, my fingers trembled. The zeros blurred. "I can't accept this." "You already have." "It's too much." "It's not enough," he corrected. "But it will do for now." When he looked at me again, the moment changed. The room wasn't just quiet, it was charged. His gaze softened, but his voice didn't. "You should eat, Clara. You still haven't." "I will," I said, defensive. "Eventually." His brow arched. "You said that 3 nights ago." "You don't even know me." His eyes flicked over my face, sharp and assessing. "I know enough." Something in his tone made my chest tighten again. He wasn't just talking about food. A knock broke the silence. Lila poked her head out from the kitchen, eyes wide as she spotted the check still in my hand. "Oh my God," she mouthed. Lorenzo turned slightly toward her, polite but unreadable. "You must be Lila, the friend who saved her from collapsing completely." She blinked. "You know my name?" "I make it a point to know the people who matter." Lila glanced at me, then back at him. "Well, thanks for the save." He nodded once. "It won't be necessary again." Something about the certainty in his tone made even Lila fall quiet. When he turned back to me, he said, "My men will collect the paintings tomorrow morning. Be here." "Of course," I said automatically, still dizzy. Then he hesitated, his gaze lowering briefly to the messy floor, the paint-splattered mugs, the thin blanket draped over the couch. "You live like someone expecting to leave," he said softly. I frowned. "I live like someone trying to survive." His lips parted, like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out another envelope. "I'm hosting a private showing Friday night," he said. "Come. See what real collectors look like when they pretend to have souls." "I can't. I don't have anything to wear." He smiled, a small, knowing thing. "Already handled." "Handled?" He moved toward the door. "You'll see." And then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of sandalwood, the hum of a quiet engine outside, and 50,000 euros of disbelief. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Lila alternated between giddy excitement and open panic. "You have to go," she said for the 10th time. "You can't just ignore that invitation. I don't even belong in that world." "Maybe not," she said, "but maybe it's time you did." Her words lingered long after she left for her photography gig. I sat alone, surrounded by my paintings, by silence, by his check on the table. It felt dangerous just being in the same room with it. That night, when I finally crawled into bed, I saw him again behind my closed eyes, his gaze steady, his voice echoing. "You underestimate your worth. And tell me, have you ever met someone who made you feel like they saw the version of you that didn't even exist yet? The one you might become, if only you dared to step closer to them?" Because that's exactly what it felt like. A dangerous kind of possibility. The next afternoon, a knock came at my door. A man in a suit, one of Lorenzo's, though he didn't say so, handed me a large white box wrapped in black satin ribbon. When I opened it, the air left my lungs. Inside was a gown, midnight blue. The fabric shimmered like liquid stars. Beneath it, a smaller box held silver earrings shaped like teardrops and a note, written in that same strong, slanted handwriting. "For Friday. Wear your hair down. L." My hand trembled. He remembered how I'd worn it that night at the ballroom, the night I fainted in his arms. If this were a fairy tale, this would be the part where the girl smiles, puts on the dress, and dances into a better life. But I knew better. Men like Lorenzo Velez didn't send gifts for free. Still, I couldn't stop touching the fabric, couldn't stop imagining his voice when he said my name. And here's the dangerous truth. Sometimes we step into the lion's den, not because we're naive, but because part of us wants to be devoured. Tell me, would you open the box? Would you wear the dress, knowing who it came from? Or would you burn it, afraid of what it might mean? Because as I stood there in that small apartment, midnight blue silk slipping through my fingers, I knew my answer. I'd wear it, and I'd walk straight into whatever waited for me. Friday arrived like a secret I wasn't supposed to keep. By sunset, the small apartment glowed with the low amber light that made even chipped paint look golden. Lila hovered at the door, fussing with my hair while pretending not to be worried. "I still don't think you should go," she said, looping a strand of hair around her finger. "I have to," I whispered. "It's business." Her reflection met mine in the cracked mirror. Business doesn't usually come wrapped in silk. She wasn't wrong. The midnight blue gown draped across my body like a second skin. When I moved, it rippled like water, catching light the same way his Aston Martin did that night he drove me home. It made me feel like someone else entirely, someone who belonged in the kind of world I'd only ever watched from the outside. "You look like a storm pretending to be calm," Lila said softly. "Be careful, okay?" "I will." But even as I said it, a voice deep inside whispered, "You don't believe that." At precisely 8 o'clock, there was a knock. Not a driver this time. Lorenzo himself stood at the door, the hallway's fluorescent light softening against the precision of his tailored suit. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He just looked at me, the way one looks at something they'd imagined but never expected to see. "Beautiful," he said finally, his voice low enough that it felt like a secret. "I knew the color would suit you." He offered his arm. I took it. Downstairs, the Mercedes Maybach S680 waited, its sleek black body gleaming beneath the streetlights. The city blurred past as we drove through narrow lanes toward the upper district where his world lived. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was charged. Every glance he gave me felt deliberate, like each moment in that car was a decision neither of us wanted to undo. "You've been quiet," he said finally. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About?" "Whether I should be here." His gaze flicked to me. "And what have you decided?" I hesitated, then met his eyes. "That it's too late not to be." A small smile curved his lips. "Good." The gallery stood at the edge of the marina, a converted warehouse transformed into a cathedral of glass and light. People glittered inside like jewels, artists, collectors, critics, all pretending not to stare as Lorenzo Velez entered with a stranger on his arm. Conversations softened, almost imperceptibly. Heads turned. I felt every eye on me. Lorenzo leaned closer. They're wondering who you are. Who am I? Tonight? His voice dropped near my ear. You're the reason they can't look away. I wasn't sure whether to be flattered or frightened. He guided me through the room, hand at the small of my back, introducing me to people whose names I recognized only from headlines and signatures beneath expensive art. The way they spoke to him, deferential, careful, made it clear that this wasn't just money or fame. This was power. One woman, elegant and sharp-eyed, brushed her fingers against my arm as she smiled. You must be the new artist Lorenzo mentioned. I blinked. He mentioned me. Quite often, she said. He rarely does that. Her tone was kind, but her eyes told a different story. Curiosity mixed with something colder, something like warning. The night shimmered on, but the air grew heavier with every passing minute. There was something about the way people watched him, half admiration, half fear, that unsettled me. When he excused himself to speak with a group of older men near the bar, I took the opportunity to wander. The art was stunning, brutal and beautiful. Sculptures that looked like they'd been torn from the bones of the earth, canvases that bled color. But what caught my eye wasn't on display. It was a photograph, half hidden behind a velvet curtain near the back wall. A portrait. Of me. I froze. The image was from the night of the charity gala. The moment right before I fainted. My face pale, eyes distant, one hand clutching the edge of a marble pillar. It was raw, unguarded, intimate. And in the background, blurred but unmistakable, Lorenzo. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking at me. I felt the ground shift beneath my heels. Footsteps approached. You found it, he said softly behind me. I turned, heart pounding. What is this? An observation, he said. A moment worth keeping. Did you take this? I commissioned it. My voice cracked. You were watching me that night? I saw you, he corrected. There's a difference. My pulse raced. That's not the same thing. He stepped closer, but his expression didn't change. Clara, I deal in control, in chaos, in the space between. But that night when you fell... He stopped himself, jaw tightening. I don't expect you to understand what that meant. I don't, I whispered. It's insane. Maybe, he said, but it's also truth. The crowd noise swelled behind us, the clinking of glasses, the hum of laughter. But in that small space between us, it was silent. He reached out, his hand hovering near my face. Don't be afraid of being seen, Clara. You create beauty out of pain. I only want to understand it. And what if I don't want to be understood? Then you shouldn't have called me, he said softly. Something inside me snapped then, not in anger, but in surrender, to curiosity, to the strange gravity between us. For the rest of the evening he stayed near, a constant presence that both protected and unsettled me. Every time our hands brushed, the air seemed to change temperature. Every time his voice dipped low near my ear, the world outside blurred into nothing. And yet, that photograph burned behind my eyes. Later, as we left the gallery, the night air was cool and sharp against my skin. The city lights shimmered off the water, and the Aston Martin DB12 waited at the curb, sleek and waiting like something alive. Why did you bring me here? I asked quietly as he opened the door for me. He hesitated before answering. Because I wanted you to see what it looks like when the world pretends to care about truth. And what about you? I don't pretend. He closed the door gently, his reflection flashing across the glass before the city swallowed it whole. We drove in silence, the hum of the engine filling the space between questions neither of us dared to ask. He stopped not at my apartment, but at a high terrace overlooking the harbor. The sea stretched out below, black and endless. I shouldn't trust you, I said finally. I know. But I do. He turned to face me, eyes soft in the dashboard light. That's the problem with truth. It doesn't wait for permission. And tell me, have you ever stood at the edge of something dangerous, knowing it could destroy you, and stepped closer anyway? Would you pull back from a person who sees every flaw you try to hide? Or would you let them in, just to feel seen for once in your life? Because I didn't pull back. And that choice changed everything. The sea below the terrace shimmered like liquid glass, catching the glow of distant streetlights. Wind tangled my hair as the waves broke somewhere far beneath us, each one sounding like a whisper of warning I refused to hear. Lorenzo stood beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see something beyond the night. Neither of us spoke for a long time. When he finally turned to me, his expression had shifted. Calm, but guarded in a way I hadn't seen before. "I didn't bring you here to confuse you," he said. "I brought you here because confusion is safer than the truth." "That's not comforting," I replied. "It's not meant to be." The wind carried his words away before they could settle. I took a slow breath. "Then tell me the truth, Lorenzo. What are you so afraid I'll find out?" He looked at me for a long moment. "That I'm not the man you think I am. I already knew that," I said quietly. "I just hoped the version I saw was real." A small, almost broken smile touched his lips. So did I. The next morning came too early. The glamour of the night before felt like a dream someone else had lived. Lila was at the kitchen table again, staring at her phone. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Clara, you need to see this." The headline on her screen made my stomach twist. "Vales Holdings under investigation. Alleged art laundering ring linked to private galleries." Beneath it was a photo of Lorenzo, walking out of a courthouse surrounded by security. The same hands that had held mine now clenched at his sides, cold and distant. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "That can't be real!" "Clara," she said softly. "He's not who you think he is." I laughed once, too sharp. "You sound like the newspaper." "I sound like someone who doesn't want to watch you get crushed." I wanted to defend him, to say there had to be another explanation, but the image on the screen made it hard to breathe. That night, I couldn't paint. I just sat by the window, the city outside flickering like a restless heartbeat. When the knock came, it was almost midnight. I knew before I opened the door that it would be him. He looked different. Tired, unshaven, the usual precision of his appearance dulled by something heavy. "May I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. He entered without speaking, his gaze flicking to the canvases stacked along the wall, to the half-finished painting of light breaking through clouds. "Finally," I whispered. "It's true, isn't it? The article." He didn't answer. "Tell me it's not," I pressed. "Tell me you're not—" "I can't." The words hit harder than I expected. He leaned against the table, shoulders bowed. "My family built everything we have on influence. Sometimes that influence came from places it shouldn't have. I tried to clean it, to build something real. The galleries were supposed to be that. And instead, they became another weapon. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell him he'd used me. But the truth was more complicated than that. "You bought my paintings," I said slowly. "Was that part of it?" He met my eyes. "No, that was the only honest thing I've done in years." The silence that followed felt like an open wound. He stepped closer, his voice low. "You should stay away from me, from all of this. There are people who will come asking questions soon, and I can't protect you if you're near me." "I don't want protection," I said, though my hands were shaking. "I want the truth. I just gave it to you." "No, you gave me a confession. That's not the same thing." He hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes confession is the only truth left." For the first time since I'd met him, I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for me. He left before dawn. By morning, the newspapers had already turned him into a villain. Every channel replayed the same footage, the arrest of 2 of his associates, the frozen image of Lorenzo stepping into a car, expression unreadable. When I tried calling him, the line was disconnected. Days passed, then weeks. The check he'd given me still sat untouched in a drawer. A reminder that every moment with him had come at a price. I painted again, but the colors felt wrong. Too dark, too loud. The woman in Echo no longer looked like she was breaking free. She looked like she was burning. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I found myself at the pier where his gallery once stood. It was closed now. Locks on the doors, posters peeled from the walls. Through the glass, I could still see traces of the night that had changed everything. The lights, the laughter, the photograph of me that had since been taken down. I pressed a hand against the cold glass. Maybe this was what he'd meant about confusion being safer than the truth. Because now that I had the truth, all it gave me was emptiness. And tell me, have you ever learned something about someone you loved that made you wish you'd never asked? Would you rather live in the comfort of the lie or in the pain of knowing? Because standing there in the fading light, I couldn't decide which hurt more. The next day, a plain envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address, just my own written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single photograph. Lorenzo, standing on the same terrace where we'd watched the sea, the wind pulling at his coat. On the back in his handwriting were 5 words. Truth doesn't hide forever, Clara. It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like a beginning I wasn't ready for. The photograph lay on my kitchen table for hours before I dared to touch it again. Truth doesn't hide forever, Clara. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, angled, deliberate. If he was sending messages, it meant one thing. Lorenzo was still out there. And maybe not guilty. I held the picture up to the light. Something shimmered at the bottom corner. A faint watermark. Numbers. Coordinates. My heart stumbled. He wasn't just reaching out. He was pointing me somewhere. By dusk, I was on a bus heading north, the city shrinking behind me like a memory. The coordinates led to an industrial district outside the port, the place where Valley's Holdings stored shipments for their galleries. It was supposed to be sealed by now, but one side gate hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, dust coated everything, wooden crates stamped with gallery codes, and between them, paintings. Dozens, maybe hundreds. But they weren't masterpieces. They were copies. Meticulous, beautiful forgeries. The articles had been right. The company was laundering money through counterfeit art. But if Lorenzo had sent me here, maybe he was trying to prove he wasn't the one behind it. A sound echoed. Footsteps. I ducked behind a crate, heart hammering. A flashlight swept the floor, moving closer. 2 men stepped into view, arguing in low Spanish. I caught only fragments. Shipment. Zurich. Velez. Blame him before Monday. Blame him. They weren't protecting him. They were setting him up. My pulse roared in my ears. I waited until they moved toward the far end of the warehouse, then slipped back outside. That night, in a cheap motel room overlooking the harbor, I spread the photograph, my phone, and the notes I'd taken. Everything pointed to one name, Alaric Velez, Lorenzo's older brother, the real architect behind the laundering. It was Alaric's signature on the invoices, Alaric's initials on the coded crate logs. Lorenzo had been covering for him, maybe even taking the fall. For the first time in weeks, hope didn't feel dangerous. It felt right. At dawn, I called the one person who might still help. Lila, I whispered. I found proof. He's innocent. She groaned. Clara, it's 6 a.m. I'm serious. I have photos, documents, everything. I just don't know how to get them to the police without getting yourself killed? Basically, a pause. Then, okay, tell me where you are. By noon, we sat in a small cafe near the marina, papers spread between half-drunk coffees. Lila read each page, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. So, his brother framed him. Of course. Classic rich family tragedy. It's more than that, I said. He didn't run because he was guilty. He ran because protecting his brother was the only way to keep their empire from collapsing. She looked up. And what happens when you clear his name? You think he'll just show up with flowers? I don't know, I admitted. But he deserves the truth. Even if it breaks you? Especially then. That night, I met with a journalist who'd once covered Lorenzo's galleries, a quiet woman named Isabel Cruz. I gave her the files anonymously, under the condition that she'd publish only when she could prove every word. 2 days later, the story broke. Exclusive, internal evidence clears Lorenzo Velez, brother Alaric indicted. The headlines changed overnight. Lorenzo's name, once spoken in suspicion, now came wrapped in questions of redemption. I didn't hear from him. Not for a week, not for 2. I told myself it didn't matter. That clearing his name was enough. But late one evening, as rain traced silver paths down my window, my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer. Clara! My breath caught. Lorenzo? Silence. Then a soft exhale. You found it. The warehouse. The proof. I couldn't let them destroy you. A pause stretched between us. I never wanted you involved, he said quietly. But you did what I couldn't. I did what was right. I know. The sound of rain filled the space between words. Where are you? I asked. Close. When I stepped outside, he was waiting across the street. No suit, no guards, just a man standing in the rain, hands in his coat pockets. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I walked toward him. You're free, I said, the words trembling in the air. He shook his head. Freedom is relative. Not tonight. Water dripped from his hair as he smiled faintly. The first real smile I'd seen since the night of the gallery. You shouldn't have risked yourself. Too late to argue. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed his fingers against my cheek, light as a question. This isn't over, he murmured. There's still damage to undo. Then don't undo it alone. Something in his eyes softened. You really think redemption is that simple? No, I said, but it's possible. And tell me, have you ever loved someone enough to believe in the version of them the world refuses to see? Would you risk being broken again, just to prove they could be whole? Because as the rain fell around us, I realized I already had. Rain kept falling for days after that night, as if the city itself were trying to wash something away. Lorenzo didn't disappear again. He stayed close but silent, sending short messages, times, places, fragments of a plan. When the call finally came, his voice was steady. Tomorrow morning, the old estate outside Girona. It ends there. The estate was a ruin of grandeur, stone walls veined with ivy, the kind of place where echoes never died. When I arrived, the air smelled of wet earth and secrets. A single black BMW X7 waited by the gates. Lorenzo stepped out first. The look in his eyes told me he hadn't slept. Are you sure you should be here? He asked quietly. I've come this far. He nodded once, then turned toward the house. Then you should see what truth looks like when it finally surfaces. Inside, Alaric Valles waited in the great hall, framed by tall windows and the fractured light of dawn. He looked nothing like the photographs, older, colder, his expression carved in arrogance. So, he said, voice smooth as glass, the prodigal brother returns, with an audience. Lorenzo didn't flinch. You used my name, my company, my life, Alaric smiled. I used what was already corrupt. You just didn't want to admit it. You laundered money through art that was supposed to rebuild the family's name. I rebuilt it, Alaric snapped. You were too sentimental to do what was necessary. Their words cracked through the room like thunder, each one louder than the rain outside. You could have stopped this, Lorenzo said. Instead, you let them destroy everything. Alaric's gaze flicked toward me. And who is she? The painter? The distraction? I'm the reason people know what you did, I said. My voice surprised even me. Steady, certain. The evidence came from your own shipments. For a second, his composure faltered. Then his smile returned. Clever girl. Lorenzo took a step closer. It's over, Alaric. The police have what they need. You'll confess, or they'll drag you out of here. You think they'll believe you? They already do. Somewhere outside, sirens wailed faintly through the rain. Alaric's eyes narrowed. You'd ruin your own blood? Lorenzo's reply was quiet, but final. You did that yourself. The door burst open. Officers flooded in, voices sharp, commands echoing. Alaric didn't resist. He simply turned to his brother one last time. You'll never escape what we are, he said. Lorenzo met his gaze. Watch me try. When they led him away, the storm broke completely, sheets of rain pounding the stone courtyard until the world blurred. Later, when the police cars were gone and the air smelled of ozone and endings, we stood beneath the archway in silence. It's finished, I said. He shook his head. It never finishes, but maybe now it can begin again. The exhaustion in his voice carried years of weight. I stepped closer, reaching for his hand. Then start there, with truth. He looked down at our joined hands, the rain sliding over our fingers. I don't deserve that, he murmured. Maybe not, I said, but you earned it. We walked out into the storm together. No more secrets, no more questions, just the quiet rhythm of two people who had finally stopped running. For the first time since the night we met, he laughed, a low, disbelieving sound that broke into something lighter. You're unbelievable, he said. So I've been told. Clara? Yes? Thank you. Have you ever watched the person you love confront their worst mistake and choose to be better instead of perfect? It's not pretty. It's raw, fragile, and real. But it's the only kind of victory that lasts. Weeks passed before the rain finally stopped. Barcelona thawed into spring, streets washed clean, air heavy with the scent of orange blossom and salt. The Valles name filled the news for months, trials, interviews, speculation, but this time it was different. Lorenzo wasn't the shadow behind the scandal anymore. He was the man who'd faced it. He sold the galleries that bore his family's mark, donated half the proceeds to the restoration of community art schools, and vanished from public life. Everyone wondered where he went. Only I knew. The little seaside town of Cadaqués wasn't on any map of power or politics. Its streets were whitewashed, its harbor calm, its silence perfect. That's where I found him again, standing by the pier, sleeves rolled up, the wind lifting his hair like it used to on that terrace months ago. He turned when he heard my footsteps. I was starting to think you preferred ghosts to people, I said. I tried ghosts, he replied with a faint smile. They're quieter but less forgiving. We stood there for a moment, the sound of waves filling the pauses words couldn't. You didn't have to disappear, I said. I did. To find out if I could exist without all of it. And? He met my eyes. I can, but I'd rather not without you. We spent the next days walking through markets, sketching, painting. He didn't talk much about the trial or the empire he'd dismantled. And I didn't ask. Some wounds heal better in silence. One afternoon, he took me to an old stone building at the edge of the village. Inside, light spilled through tall windows onto empty walls. What is this place? I asked. A gallery, he said. Ours if you want it. No investors, no secrets, just art that deserves to be seen. I laughed softly. That sounds almost ordinary. That's the point. He handed me a key. Small, silver, simple. You showed me what honest looks like. I'd like to spend the rest of my life keeping it that way. When the gallery opened that summer, it wasn't glamorous. It was small, warm, filled with color and laughter. Children from the local art school came to hang their first pieces beside ours. Tourists wandered in, unaware they were looking at work painted by a woman who once thought her art would never be enough. Every morning, Lorenzo unlocked the door, made coffee that was always too strong, and kissed the top of my head before saying, "Let's make the world a little truer today." And somehow, that was enough. Sometimes at night, we'd sit by the water, watching the boats drift across the dark. He'd trace circles on my palm and whisper, "Truth doesn't hide forever." I'd smile. No, it just waits for the right light. The past never vanished completely. It lingered like old brushstrokes beneath new paint, but it no longer defined us. It only reminded us how far we'd come. And maybe that's what redemption really is. Not the absence of guilt, but the courage to build something honest on top of it. What do you think redemption looks like in real life? Is it forgiveness, change, or simply learning to begin again? Tell me in the comments how you would define it. Because every story, including yours, deserves a second chance. The waves broke softly below the gallery windows, carrying the night with them. Lorenzo reached for my hand, and I let him. For once, there was no fear in the gesture, only peace. And as the tide rolled in, washing the past clean, I finally understood. Some stories don't end where you lose everything. They end where you start to choose again.